You know how, Randy? Did you ever handle? Oh, man. Okay, we got 3. You need 4. But we used to play euchre, and what would happen in euchre is you could literally go through a whole game, and it doesn't matter. It has nothing to do with you. You just happen to get bad hand after bad hand after bad hand, and you'll lose like 10-0 to the other team just because of randomness, okay? And a lot of times people use that expression, you got dealt a bad hand in life, going, it's not anything you did. It wasn't like you made bad decisions or bad choices. You just, by the luck of the draw, got a bad hand in life. Okay? How many of you would say, looking at your background, would say you probably classify as one of those people who got a bad hand in life, looking back at your younger age? Okay, a few of you. Most of you don't want to admit it, but a few of you. One of the good examples I had, it was Kellen and Allison. They were a couple of kids in my youth group at my last church. And when she was 3 and he was 4, they had this dad, and he was the specimen of health. He was a bodybuilder, just a huge guy, manly man. Within 4 months, was diagnosed with cancer and died. And they were 3 and 4 years old. And I remember Kellen and Allison, I had them for the next 6 years in youth group. And they were always different kids. And I remember always talking to them going, you guys are just different. And the reason they were different is they'd had their dad die when they were 3 and 4 years old. And they were just with their mom at that point and just trying to make it, skimming by the skin of their teeth day by day. And they were different kids, and they were kids I always went, you just got dealt a bad hand in life. That's just what it is. Well, today we're going to look at a lady named Esther. And she is a woman that was dealt a bad hand in life. But through applying the 3 qualities we're talking about in this series, which is personal integrity, spiritual integrity, spiritual perseverance, and taking risks for God, she was able to experience the hand of God in her life in a very mighty way. And it's because she had those 3 qualities, and it didn't matter where she came from, what her background was, it didn't matter what hand she was dealt, she applied these things, and she did incredible things for the kingdom of God. If you have your Bibles with you, we're going to look at her story. She actually has a book named after her, the book of Esther. It's in the Old Testament. It goes Esther, Job, and I think Psalms. Right before you get to Psalms, you have Esther in there. It's the 11-chapter book, so it's not real long. I would encourage you to read all the details this week. If you get a chance to sit down, it'll take you 35 to 45 minutes to read it all and kind of get all the content of it. But I'm going to give you a good overview of it today. Here's what happens in the book of Esther. At this time, little background, what's happening in the world. The Jews at this point have been displaced. They have been exiled, and most of them have been exiled into the Persian Empire, which at this time in history is a huge empire and owns most of the known world. And the Jews have kind of become part of that, exiled into and then spread out all over the place throughout this empire. This is where Esther finds herself, as she's a Jew within the Persian Empire. Okay? Now, the whole story starts off this way. There's a man named King Xerxes. And he is a king of Persia at this time. And what happens is he's throwing this lavish party, and it is a year-long party to display to the world how incredible he is and the riches he has. So for his nobles, he throws this party for a year. And somewhere amongst this party, he gets the idea, I'm going to invite my queen in, and she's going to come in and perform. And we don't really know what. It was basically just to show her off, to go, look how beautiful my wife is. I have all these riches, and I have this hot wife, okay? That's what he's thinking. So he invites her in, and he sends a request, you need to come to the party so I can show you off. And she rejects the request and basically says, I'm not coming to be a show pony. I'm not coming in just so you can show me off. I'm not coming. At this point, the king gets a little hot. How dare she tell me no? I am the king. You do what I tell you to do. I'm the most powerful man on this planet. You come when I call for you. All of his noblemen at this point, it's a funny part of the story. All of his nobles get a little bit scared as well. And here's what they start thinking. They start going, if the queen starts disobeying the king, our wives will start disobeying us at home as well. And that's as bad. Okay? Now, all the husbands in here, you know how that works. We've all thought that before. Like, what if that comes home and they start not listening to us and just doing whatever we tell them? You know how that works. Because in my household, Autumn still, after 17 years of marriage, I say, do it, and she does it. And there's no discussion. There's no anything. Okay. Again, what stays in here, stays in here. It doesn't go to the children's ministries where my wife is, okay? Here's kind of what it says. In Esther chapter 1, verses 17, it says, this is his noble speaking. Women everywhere will begin to despise their husbands when they learn that Queen Vashti has refused to appear before the king. Before this day is out, the wives of all the king's nobles throughout Persia and Media will hear what the queen did and will start treating their husbands the same way. There will be no end to their contempt and their anger. So these guys get scared. Holy cow, this is going to crumble the entire social structure of our society. We have to deal with this. So they come up with a plan, and they basically convince the king to go, you exile her, and you start looking for a new queen. Get rid of her, send a message across the queen or across the kingdom. You don't listen to your husband, you're booted out of the house, and we replace you. Okay? That's basically the message that this king sets up, the king of Persia at this point. So he exiles her, he banishes her, and he starts this process of looking for a new queen. This is where we find Esther for the first time. Esther at this time, she is an orphan. Both of her parents have died, supposedly somewhere where she was a younger age, and she has an uncle named Mordecai who basically took her in when her parents died and raised her as one of his own daughters. So at some point, she has lost her parents, she's been adopted by her uncle, and she's been living with him. And this is what the plan comes from the king. The king basically goes, to replace my queen, we will just send out my workers. They will go find anyone they think is beautiful that's unmarried, and they will bring them back to the palace, and they will become the king's concubines. And then over a period of time, he will figure out if one of them he likes enough to make the queen and make the new queen. Okay? So he sends out his messengers, and they go out, and they basically, from best I can tell, what would happen is they would walk through towns and go, is she married? No, she's good looking. She's coming back with us. Okay? We see from the scriptures, Esther's very beautiful. They walk through her town, and she's picked. And basically at that point, this is why I say she was dealt a bad hand. She's an orphan. She's living with her uncle Mordecai. And at this point, a guy just comes into town and says, you're leaving your whole family and everything. Pack your stuff. You're heading back to the palace. You now become the property of the king. Okay? This happens to her. So she gets picked. At this point, they take her back to the palace. And what you have with the palace at this point is a lot like you guys watch this on TV now. This isn't as odd as you think. Like The Bachelor or The Bachelorette or whatever. We're watching it on TV, what they used to do in ancient times. The only difference is the people that go on those shows choose to go on those shows. Back in this situation, they're handpicked and they're told you're going to go here. But they collect all these beautiful women. They come in. They're called concubines, which means this. They will never be with another man their entire lives except for the king, and they are possession of the king. He owns them. And they would go there and they would have, you can read the details in here, about a 12-month beauty process given to them. And then during that process, at some point, the king would decide when he wanted you to come visit, and he would try out the different ladies of his concubines, and he would try them out to see if he liked any of them to name queen. Once he tried you out, you became one of his wives, and then they put you in a different location, and you lived there the rest of your life, untouched by any other man for the rest of your life, unless he ever requested you again. Okay? This is not a real appealing thing for people. Basically, they're cattle. They're taken from their homes, and they're stuck there, and they become property of the king. What we find there through this is this. One, Esther is a woman that keeps her integrity spiritually. Through all this, she is still a godly woman. They're being an orphan. They're being taken from her home, from being thrown into this process. She is still a godly woman with spiritual integrity. And she is a woman who was still doing and living the way God wanted her to live. And most of us, we can look at those things and you go, if those happen in our lives, I have reasons to resent God. I have reasons to be upset with him. Esther isn't one of them. Esther is one of those that still goes, I lived the life God's called me to live. And she lives it. The only thing she does not do is this. She does not let the king know or anyone working in the palace that she is a Jew. Being a Jew still then was not a good thing. It wasn't necessarily a horrible thing yet, but it wasn't something that was an appealing thing. So she hides that she's a Jew, but she's in this process. She keeps her integrity. The other thing we know is this. She's a woman of spiritual perseverance, because there's a lot of times that she could have turned her back on God. There's a lot of times that she could have went on her own path and just given up, raised her hands up and go, I'll do it my way. But she didn't. She is a woman faithful to God. So we see two of the core qualities in her right from the beginning: a woman of spiritual integrity, a woman of spiritual perseverance. The next thing that happens is this. She becomes queen. And here's kind of what happens. In the, Esther chapter 2, verse 17, it says this: she has her time with the king. He requests her, and the king gets his time to test her out, basically. And it says, and the king loved Esther more than any of the other young women. He was so delighted with her that he set the royal crown on her head, and he declared her king instead of Vashti. So what we have is this: he likes her and goes, I like you so much, Esther, you're queen. You're taking her spot. Here we go. We solved the problem. I have my new queen. She gets to become queen at this point. She moves into a new location in the palace. She doesn't sit with the concubines anymore. She doesn't sit with the other wives. She's in a separate place. But basically still only sees a king if he requests for him to see her. Okay, she can't go see him whenever she wants. If he says, hey, I'd like to talk to you or do dinner with you, she would come over. They would do dinner. Okay, that's about how the relationship worked. Next thing we see in the scriptures is this. Mordecai, her uncle, he works in the palace. He kind of keeps tabs on what's happening with Esther here. Some point during her early years as a queen, there are some guys that put a plot together to assassinate King Xerxes. Okay? Through that assassination, he gets wind of it. He alerts Esther. She alerts the king and his men. They overthrow the plot. They find it out. They save the king's lives and basically go, thank you, good job, for uncovering this plot. And they save the life of the king. Small little plot, but it becomes bigger later in the story. From there, we're introduced to a man named Haman. Haman is an extremely arrogant, probably narcissistic, loved power type mentality guy. And he's introduced in the story, and what we find out is this: the king names him kind of his right-hand man in the kingdom. And he says, basically, Haman, you're going to oversee all my nobles. You're going to oversee that entire part of the kingdom. You take it over. And he gives him basically the most second powerful man in the world. That's what he's given. At that point, he's wearing this ring that signifies he's the right-hand man of the king. And everybody in the kingdom, when this guy would walk by, they would bow down, they would worship this guy, they would show him respect. Why? If this guy doesn't like me, he will kill me. He's a very powerful man, and at the same time, I want to get in good with him because if I know him, I have power. Okay? So King Haman walks around, people bow to him, except for one guy in the kingdom, and his name is Mordecai. Mordecai is a Jew. Mordecai refuses to worship another individual. Mordecai refuses to bow down and show him the proper respect that they all thought he should because he goes, I can't, I bow to God, basically. And we know this from other scriptures of how the Jews saw men and saw authority that way. So he will not show him the respect Haman wants. Haman at this goes berserk. Cannot handle this, cannot handle having the thousands bow down to him, but the one guy stand and not show him the respect. So Haman goes nuts. And at this point, we read this in chapter 3. It says, when Haman saw that Mordecai would not bow down or show him respect, he was filled with rage. He had learned of Mordecai's nationality, so he decided it was not enough just to lay his hands on Mordecai alone. Instead, he looked for a way to destroy all the Jews throughout the entire empire of Xerxes. So what we see is he does this. This drives me so crazy, I don't even want to just kill him. He's a Jew. I'll kill all the Jews as well. And he puts his plan in place, and he goes to the king, and the plan is basically this. I think it's like in March the next year, so it's about a year later. King, would you approve it that on this date, anybody that wants to kill a Jew can kill a Jew, and they can have all their property? And there's no repercussions. There's no legal issues. You get to freely kill Jews on that day, and you can take anything that they have. You can then raid their house. You can take their house. Anything they have is yours. And the king basically says, yeah, sure, that sounds good. Go for it. Okay? So they sign this order, and they write it in letter form, and they send it out through the whole kingdom and say, in 1 year's time, if you are a Jew, you are a marked man. In 1 year, anybody that wants to attack you and murder you can murder you free of charge, and they can take all of your possessions. This obviously concerns the Jews. The Jews get word of this, and they all start freaking out. And they start going, what do we do? We're all going to be murdered in a year. We're going to have everybody out to kill us because they're going to want our property. We can't do anything. We can't defend ourselves, and they're not going to be punished. What do we do? Mordecai, a Jew, gets wind of this. I think Mordecai looks at it and goes, my only option is who? Esther. Esther's my shot. So he goes and he sends a letter to Esther, and he basically implores her, Esther, you've got to save us. You're the only one that has influence here. Here's what word has been given out. We're all dead. You're the last hope we have. And the first thing we see from Esther is this, hesitation. She's scared. Here's what she says. Her first reply in chapter 4 is this. This is her words, all the king's officials and even the people in the provinces know that anyone who appears before the king in his inner court without being invited is doomed to die unless a king holds out his golden scepter. And the king has not called for me to come to him for 30 days. So her first reply is Mordecai's going, you've got to go to the king and you've got to tell him. And she goes, you know what? Everybody knows this. If you go uninvited to the king and just walk in without him requesting you to come, you're dead unless he basically has grace on you and goes, no, you can live. But you put your life on the line by just showing up unannounced. And she goes, he hasn't talked to me in 30 days. There's no way I'm doing this, okay? Next thing that comes back is Mordecai goes, maybe this is some motivation. He gives this message back. He says, Mordecai sent this reply to Esther. Don't think for a moment that because you are in the palace, you will escape when all the other Jews are killed. If you keep quiet at this time like this, deliverance or relief for the Jews will rise from some other place, but you and your relatives will die. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for just such a time as this? The most famous line of this book is Mordecai's reply, and he just basically says, Esther, don't think that you're going to escape if you don't tell him you're a Jew and you stand up for us. If they're going to kill the rest of the Jews, they will find out you're a Jew when they connect you to me, and our whole family's dead too, and God will find another path to rescue some of us, but we're all dead. Just understand that. And who knows, maybe the bad hand you've been dealt in your entire life, maybe God's been setting it all up to have you at this position at this time to do this work to save your people. Maybe that's what's happening, Esther. Did you ever think about that? And Mordecai sends this motivation. She responds back and she says, go and gather together all the Jews of Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will do the same. And then, though it is against the law, I will go see the king. If I must die, I must die. Here we see the risk. We've seen her integrity. We've seen her perseverance. Here we see the risk-taking, which is, okay, if I have to do this, if I got to die, I've got to die, but I've got to do this. This is my option. I've got to take this risk. And what she tells them is, you tell everyone we know, 3 days fast. Don't drink, don't eat anything for 3 whole days. We're going to do the same thing and just pray for this because I'm going in and putting my life on the line. And if this doesn't work, I'm dead, you're all dead, there is no hope. So they all go to pray. She decides to take the risk, and she shows up after the 3 days, and she just walks in on the king into his throne room. And what we find is this. The king actually puts his scepter down, and he is very favorable to her. And he basically says, Esther, what brings you here? You know what? You can ask for anything you want, up to half my kingdom, and it's yours. Obviously, he had a spot in his heart for her, or God was working on him to show her favor. And he goes, half my kingdom's yours. You ask for it, it's yours. I'll give you anything you want. It's yours, Esther. And what she does is this, and I find this very intriguing. Taking risk isn't always easy. She takes the first risk of, she just put her life down, he saves her. Now all she has to do is, King Xerxes, this guy is setting up to kill all my people, including me. But she doesn't. Once he shows her favor and says, I'll give you half my kingdom, all she does is this. She says, all I want to do was, can you come have dinner with me tonight? You and Haman, would you bring him along? I just want to prepare a banquet for you and have a meal with you, and then I'll tell you what I'm really concerned about there. And he says, absolutely, we'll be there. And you see her kind of backing off her risk. This is a little too much for me. I just put my life down one time, and now I'm having to do it again. I'm not willing to do this. Have you ever been there? You ever taken a risk for God, and then there's another one, and you would assume, I already took one, this one's going to be easy, and then you realize, no, this one's not easy either, and you're hesitant. That's what's going on with Esther. So what happens there is they show up that night, and they have dinner with her, and at dinner, the king again implores her, and he basically says, Esther, what is it? What do you really want? I know it's not just to have a meal. What do you really want? And again, she hesitates. Again, she says this. She says, King, if it would please you, and he says, I'll give you half the kingdom. Yeah, it pleases me. She says, will you eat with me again tomorrow evening, and then I'll tell you. Give me another day. You ever been in these situations where it's like, how long can I procrastinate? How many of you are procrastinators? Okay, you know exactly who Esther is, okay? She's a procrastinator. She took the first step, took the risk, and now it's kind of like, I don't want to do this next one because I'm going to call out your right-hand man, and you love that guy, and if you don't like what I say, you might cut my head off right now too, and I'm not wanting to take this one, so maybe if I put it off till tomorrow, okay, I put it off to this meal, maybe if I can put it off to the next day, somehow it'll get easier. No, it's not going to get easier, Esther. You're still going to have to do the same thing. That's where she's at. So she invites him back, and the king says, great, we'll be there tomorrow. Little side plot takes place then. Next thing we have is that night. Haman leaves that dinner party. He's excited because he's having dinner with the king and the queen and going, I am so tight with these people. And he walks out and he walks by Mordecai, and Mordecai won't bow to him, and it drives him crazy again. And he goes home to his family and says, I can't wait for a year to kill that guy. I want to kill all the Jews, but I want him dead now. And I'm going to go request from the king that I can just kill him tonight. And he says, would you guys go build? We don't know historically, we don't know the word here. Either he builds gallows to hang him or a pole to spike him on. Okay, what was that called? Whatever, you put a pole and you impale the guy on a pole for everybody to see, okay? Not sure which one is which, what he does, but one or the other, he designs the execution device, says, go get that ready in the square. I'm going to go see the king to get permission to murder that guy because I can't stand seeing him anymore. So he heads over to the palace. Well, so happens to be that night the king can't sleep. And you've had these nights where you just can't go to sleep. He can't go to sleep. We do what? We turn on the TV, right? The king back then doesn't have a TV, so he basically tells one of his guys, go get some of the history books from my kingdom and read to me about the things I've done. Maybe that'll help me go to sleep. So they grab a book out. So happens to be a book that reminds him when Mordecai uncovered the assassination attempt against him. And they're reading through it, and he reads it to him, and he basically says, what did we do for that guy? And they just go, basically nothing. And he's like, dude, we owe that guy something. We need to do something nice for him. He saved my life, and we didn't do anything for him. Shortly after that, Haman shows up. And he says, hey, king, you can't sleep? Great, I'm here. I got a question for you. And the king says, well, before you get into your stuff, let me ask you a question. Somebody I really respect, someone who's been very kind to me, someone who needs a lot of respect in the kingdom, what would you do for him? And Haman's thinking, sweet, I'm the in man here. He's going to celebrate me and everything else. So he goes overboard and he's like, hey, get your royal horse out, put your royal robes on him, walk him around town, take your most powerful man and have him walk with him and talk about how great this guy is and have him celebrate in the city. And the king says, fabulous. There's this dude named Mordecai that we didn't reward years ago. Would you go do that tomorrow morning for him? And Haman at that point goes, are you kidding me? He goes home, and it says basically his family says, just leave the dude alone. Something's not right here. This is beyond human stuff here. Something isn't right. Just stay away from this guy. Something bad's going to happen. Next morning, he wakes up. He has to take Mordecai, stick him on his horse, walk him around town, and go, look at this wonderful fella. And you can get a picture of Haman walking around town with this guy. Yeah, wonderful guy. Look at him. Dude, I want to kill this guy so bad. Look at him. Yeah, hey. Great little guy here. Dude, I can't wait to slaughter you someday. That's exactly what he's thinking as he's walking around town. Gets done with it. By the time he gets back, it's time for dinner. And he's having dinner with the queen, Esther again, and with the king. So he leaves that. He immediately goes over to this dinner. And this is the point where Esther finally gives her request. And they show up, they eat, and the king says, Esther, what is it? And she says, here's the deal, king. You signed an order. Haman put it in place. It is to execute all the Jews, that they can steal from us. They can kill all of us. There's no repercussions. He's the one that organized it. And king, I'm a Jew, so I have a death sentence on me too. And right there, you have her next risk-taking thing. She puts her neck on the line. Okay, this is Haman. This is a guy the king loves. This is a guy he's promoted to the second place in his kingdom, gave him power. And she calls him out and says, this guy's trying to murder me. The king at this point goes into a rage. Is this true? Yeah. It says he flies out of the room in a rage. He's so upset. While that happens, Haman realizes I'm a dead man. And he goes over to the couch or whatever she was sitting on where Esther is and starts begging for his life. When the king comes back in, he sees her over next to him, thinks he's making a pass at his wife. And then at that point calls in his guys, and they put a bag on his head, and they take him down, and the things he had built, either the pike to impale him or the gallows to hang him, they take him down immediately and kill him. And he's dead. Esther at this point says to the king, "King, I know we can't change your words, because when your words are in place, they're like God's. We can't change them. But could you do this? Could you allow the Jews to defend themselves when that day comes?" And if you read the rest of the story, you'll see he agrees to that. The Jews are saved, and they actually defend themselves well come that day. And then they get it extended to actually retaliate by the Persian Empire. And you see this whole thing where they wipe out their enemies, the people that hate them. Read that. That's chapters 10 and 11, I think, in Esther. Kind of an interesting conclusion to the book. But you see Esther, a woman dealt a bad hand in life, experience the hand of God in her life in a mighty, mighty way. And this morning, I want you to know, if you get nothing else out of this, is this: it does not matter what hand you were dealt in life, good or bad, you can still experience the hand of God in your life and do incredible things for his kingdom. What we see is this: there's spiritual integrity, there's spiritual perseverance, there's a willingness to put everything on the line for God. You can experience the hand of God the same way Esther did. You need to know that God doesn't show favoritism, but God does reward faithfulness. Get that. God does not show favoritism. He doesn't look at you and go, what hand were you dealt? Good, bad, anything else? How do you look? What's your background? He doesn't show favorites, but he does reward faithfulness to him. And you need to know that. You need to follow God's call on your life and start implementing it in your life. And you will experience the amazing hand of God the same way Esther did. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, Lord, I love this story. It's one of the most fascinating, plot-twisting stories in the Old Testament. And it's not just a story, it's an actual account. We know just through the different descriptions of the Persian Empire and historical records and all, we know those things happened. And it's amazing how you worked. And Father, you can do the same thing in our lives. Lord, when we get ourselves focused on the right things, when we focus on our integrity with you, when we focus on our perseverance and sticking through the tough times with you and continuing to have our integrity, and when we're willing to put our lives on the line, to risk things in your name, Lord, you intervene in our lives, and you are there, and you do amazing things that we can never comprehend. So, Father, that's my prayer for us this morning, is that, Lord, as your followers, that we would implement those three qualities in our life on a consistent basis so that we could see you at work in our lives doing incredible things for your kingdom. Because when we experience your hand active in our lives, it goes from religion to relationship. It goes from just a thing we go put our time into to an active relationship with the all-powerful, almighty God interacting in our lives. That's amazing. So, Father, may we all experience that in our lives and in our walk with you. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.